But again, we want to take your questions here, guys. So I think there's microphones in the back they're going to pass around. But as we're getting the microphones, does anybody want to put their hand up now and ask one? Oh, we have a couple of people. Right.
Somebody will bring the microphone up here. Actually, while he's coming up, let me just make a comment. I have an interesting experience in my own office here. A combination of what Alan and Ron talked about. One of my junior employees, 24 years old, just finished her MBA. She'd been working for me for 6 months, and she said, I have to go early today. I'm closing on my house. I said, you're buying a house? 24 years old? She said, oh yes, my parents tasked me with buying it for them. We're all in the midst of applying for permanent residence. So you think about this young woman, she all of a sudden now has to outfit this house. So that's a whole different aspect to a consumer than your typical house buyer. And now a year later, she's got her little brother in who they've sentenced to finish high school, and she's taking care of him in that house as well. Definitely a different family dynamic. Do we have a
one more statistic.
Right up front here, we have a couple
of questions right up here.
One more statistic, building on what Sarah's talked about. 11/11. Put 11/11 in your mind. Used to be Singles Day. It's now Cyber Day. Okay, they've taken it over. Last Cyber Day, last November, Alibaba did $6 billion in one day.
One day. Wow. And the U.S. Cyber Monday was $2 billion.
Yeah.
And it was all over the press how big Cyber Monday was in the U.S. A third of one day in China.
We have a first question back here.
Okay.
I'll bring the microphone up there just a minute.
Sorry, but okay. Dueling questions. Okay.
You spoke a lot about consumption and purchasing, and I was wondering if you have any thoughts around philanthropy and charitable giving and the effects.
Yeah, though at the beginning, very slowly.
Yeah.
Philanthropy is in the family. Within the family, you move your money around. There's investment in health for the elderly, not enough for the last chunks of the population and education. But the whole philanthropic movement is very, very early on there. It's virtually, you compare with North America on a per capita basis, you wouldn't even see a scratch.
Go ahead.
Sure. I was just going to throw another thought in there. It isn't programmatic. There wouldn't be something like the charity for cancer or Susan's breast cancer. It tends to be event-driven. When there's something like the Behe earthquake,
right,
or there's the tsunami in Southeast Asia, or something happens in the Chinese community, they very much will open their wallet. It's considered an obligation when you have enough money, but it's not something that you sign up for in time.
And a corporate obligation.
Yeah.
For instance, when the Sichuan earthquake took, one of our clients, which is China Life Insurance, which is one of the biggest insurance companies, took all the money it had planned to put in training and other forms of education, moved it all into the Sichuan community.
This is also driven by the fact that there are very few NGOs in China. Charities have a difficult time operating in China, so it's a custom that's developing. And you see it as well if you look at the ethnic Chinese community in Toronto. You'll see, if we go to charity events, the Hong Kong community is much more active than the mainland community. That's just a matter of timing. Let's go here.
Well, my question is, how is all this capital generated? We think of China, we've seen it as a socialistic, non-capitalistic country, private enterprise discouraged and so on. You couldn't start up businesses. I mean, that's the way we've always thought of it. All of a sudden now, we find, I asked a neighboring farmer in Collingwood, he said the Chinese bought all this land out here. Well, how come this sudden transition from a non-free enterprise? How come all these millionaires, how have they generated this?
Let me give some I'm going to talk three sectors and over to my colleagues to answer. Firstly, it's not sudden. Citibank 15 years ago estimated there were $250 billion of hard currency buried somewhere outside the banking system in China. If any of you have been into Xinjiang province to some of the markets there, you will see that part of the markets are changing your currency to make sure you've got up-to-date transfer, and it disappears outside the banking system. I was in Beijing in 1989 when the first Lamborghini was delivered. And there was on television that night, and it was in the Temple of Heavenly Peace in the forecourt there. And there was the head of Lamborghini Italy delivering a yellow Lamborghini, the first one they sold in China. And there was this Chinese gentleman taking possession and driving off down the street. When I saw the publicity that night, the camera pans over the audience applauding, and the audience was some very key party members. Instant communication. Consumption is good, you can now spend it. So, firstly, it's there historically. Second, you've got to think about three sources of capital. Source number one, in roughly 40% of the economy are state-owned enterprises. So the government, through its banking system, continues to pour money, and it's gone through two phases. When we first started getting involved with what are called the asset management corporations in China, they were taking all the bad debts of the state-owned enterprises and repurposing them. So the bad debt ratio, the Chinese government claimed in the big banks like ICBC and Bank of China went down, they claimed to about 8% bad debt. Bah, humbug. I figured it never got down lower than about 20%. And they're starting to invest there. So you've got enormous amounts of money going into the financial sector, the resource sector, and the telecommunications sector, all of which are state-owned enterprises. Second group, you do have the emergence of a private sector. And where those millionaires come from is mostly recent, they're mostly young, and they're mostly in telecommunications and the IT sectors. There are some in real estate, because the real estate boom is ongoing, but a lot of them have come out of the people like Alibaba, which Rob mentioned. The third area is limited, but some money coming in from Chinese diaspora, including Taiwan, and investing in companies and businesses there. So you've got those three sectors, and the one that we don't like to talk about too much is how much comes through the government but is not officially recorded. That's exactly what they're trying to cut down on.
Yeah, I think we had some more questions, so we'll keep
There's another
moving.
question back there.
Great question.
How is this incredible advancement in wealth creation affecting the advancement of human rights and welfare services?
Well, I'll start. It's a highly uneven society. I mean, I guess when 1949, which was when the People's Republic of China was formed, Mao famously said, women hold up half the sky, everyone is equal. And today, you know that thing, the Gini coefficient, it's a highly unequal society. And the spoils of a lot of this commercial development is truly flow to a very, very small proportion. And so, and they also don't look through the same lens. We look through a lens of a Western, social responsibility lens. They don't look through that lens at all. Maybe you guys would like to comment on that.
I mean, I would say that, well, there's lots of progress that needs to be made. One of the driving factors, which is the government's desire to remain in power, means that urban-rural split, that high-income, low-income split, if it nears the point at which it threatens instability, that is a really big problem for the government, which is why this latest reform package involves much more aggressive changes to the social safety net. So human rights is part of that. This is a very interesting time in the Chinese government because you see, at the same time, crackdowns on corruption, you see activists, anti-corruption activists also being put in jail. So it's a bit awkward, but I think that almost anything you look at in China, if you take it back to the need to keep China growing, to keep stability, because for many thousands of years it was not an easy country to put together, that drives things, and that hopefully bodes well for it. Now,
I think of China in the whole area of human rights, democracy, and all those terms as 2 steps forward and 1.5 steps backwards. They'll release, they'll experiment. For instance, a group of citizens in Shanghai 2 years ago blocked the expansion of one of the major transit systems because it was going into a middle-class area. They succeeded in pushing it back and getting it cancelled. What's called the Leaping Tiger Gorge in the interior, it's a beautiful gorge, very famous. There was going to be a massive development there, a dam nearby and a roadway. The local residents fought it, succeeded, pushed it back. So you're getting some evidence of that happening. But, exactly as Sarah said, If it looks like it's going to catch fire into a broader movement, it will be shut down very quickly. And the reason they're able to do this is right now, and this is back to the economic growth again, while it's delivering improvement in purchasing capability and economic circumstances and quality of life for people, they're not going to push it that hard. But one historical element. Back in the early days of the Manchu dynasty, China was being invaded by a bunch of people around them. And in order to get the money to fight back, they elevated the role of the merchants. The merchants were the fourth class, the lowest class. The merchants were allowed to move around. They were allowed to put up flags to show they were successful. They were allowed to wear expensive things. And for about 40 or 50 years, it funded a major success in pushing back some of the invaders. Were they ever given political power? No. China does not have an automatic tradition that we like to assume is of the West, of economic freedom leading straight to political freedom. Do not expect a linear link. It won't be there.
Another question? One more question, that's all we have time for. There we go.
Okay.
I actually had two questions, but I'll keep it to one, which I think is probably relevant. Well, we'll see. Relevant to the population here, which is that China has also become the leading purchaser in what are fondly known as emotional investments, antiques, art, and are driving up the prices of these things, also repatriating many of the lovely objets d'art that are in North America and in Europe. Are we expecting that to continue? Will that still be a very important part of consumerism? And what is that going to actually do for museums or collectors in other parts of the world?
I will suggest if it's considered a luxury. I'll even take Bordeaux wine. They're the world's largest consumers now of Bordeaux wine. I don't know if they drink it. The world's largest buyers of cognac. I don't think they drink it. They're buying artwork. They're buying artifacts. They are going to be on the world stage very acquisitive. And if they consider this something that has any way of connection with the Chinese society and history, they will not be outbid. And so I think, unfortunately, there's going to be a force to be reckoned with we haven't felt yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an economic equation. You just have that many more people with the money to spend, the cultural affinity for those goods. However, the thing to look at is the evolution of how people are consuming. I look at what's happening in China today, and I think back to Taiwan, where I lived in the mid-'80s, early '90s, and I remember being stuck on an airplane, unable to pass through the duty-free cart sitting in the middle of the row, because the Taiwanese on the plane were buying up the whiskeys and the cigarettes when they had already walked on the plane with tons of duty-free bags. And a friend of mine in Taiwan said, well, you know, we Chinese, we went so many hundreds of years with no food to fill our stomachs. Now that we have more than enough money to fill our stomachs, we haven't quite figured out yet how to spend it. And so the first step is that very obvious consumption. There was a wedding of a kid in my apartment building in Beijing one day, where the procession outside had 4 Rolls Royces and 5 candy-colored Ferraris. That's not going to go well. So the answer, well, I don't think we have it, is are those are the antiques and the artistic goods considered part of that evolution of conspicuous consumption, or is there really just such a strong cultural link that will continue to drive that?
I have phrased the question of bad use for it. Why would we expect them to operate any differently than the Europeans and the North Americans did when they went global? It's the same principle.
Partly because of the funding.
Now they've got the money.
They have the money.
All right, well, I think we've run out of time. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.